President Barack Obama tried to convince the American public that the country's principles and security require a response to the use of chemical weapons. On August 21st, the Syrian government gassed to death hundreds of its people. On Tuesday, the president sought to make a case of military action in hopes of sending a message to Syrian President Bashar Assad, as well as other dictators.
Because these weapons can kill on a mass scale, with no distinction between soldier and infant, the civilized world has spent a century working to ban them. And in 1997, the United States Senate overwhelmingly approved an international agreement prohibiting the use of chemical weapons, now joined by 189 governments that represent 98% of humanity. On August 21st, these basic rules were violated, along with our sense of common humanity. No one disputes that chemical weapons were used in Syria. The world saw thousands of videos, cell phone pictures, and social media accounts from the attack. And humanitarian organizations told stories of hospitals packed with people who had symptoms of poison gas. Moreover, we know the Assad regime was responsible.
Obama acknowledged the feelings of a war-weary America and said he was not contemplating sending troops into Syria for a long-running civil war. He did say the U.S. military could strike effectively to degrade that country's chemical weapons stockpile without fear of retaliation from that nation's forces. Here with more on the president's address and reaction from Oklahoma politicians, our man in Washington, D.C., Chris Castile. Chris, thanks for your time today.
You bet, Dave. Good to be here.
Chris, did the president accomplish what he set out to do in that speech?
Well, probably not, Dave, but it wasn't, exactly clear, last night why he went ahead with the speech. What was he trying to accomplish at that
Chris,
point?
I was going to ask you about that too, because there was that the Syrian, I guess the Russian government had a response earlier in the day. It was almost like, hey, there's some diplomatic efforts underway here.
Right, and originally when he planned the speech, it was going to be to try to convince Americans, try to convince Congress to authorize the use of force there. Then you basically had the president early in the day on Tuesday go up to Capitol Hill and say, look, just put the vote off. We've got this diplomatic situation working. Let's see how it plays out. So at that point, it wasn't really clear. It was when he went to the podium last night. What is the message here? Because it was interesting. He waited a long time into the remarks, which lasted about 15 minutes, to get to the whole situation with Russia and the chemical weapons convention. But then he spent about 2 paragraphs in the speech on it. So it wasn't really clear. What was he trying to accomplish last night? He had his work cut out for him, obviously, in trying to convince the American people and Congress, to support the use of force, but that's what he focused on. It also seemed like he was trying to, whether you want to call it the red line or whatever, just explain to people, this is a line that's been crossed here, a line that was decided after World War I. It was just not, it was not humane to use these kinds of weapons, and the world has banned them. Most of the world has banned them. And you need to understand they've crossed this line, and we've got to do something about it. You can't let this happen and turn your back on it, which was, a big part of his message, that the U.S. doesn't turn its back on atrocities like that. So I guess in that sense, maybe, he accomplished his goal. I mean, he spent a long time talking about what had happened there, why it wasn't acceptable, and the U.S.'s principles, and ultimately his explanation about why it threatened the security of the country.
We're chatting via Skype with Chris Castile, our Washington, D.C. reporter, talking about the president's speech last night. And Chris, how did the Oklahoma delegates respond?
Well, they had talked a lot about it earlier in the day, even before the speech. They knew what the situation was, and most of them are leaning no or have come out strongly against it. It just said, there's no way I'm going to vote for the use of force. My constituents are hammering me. I think Congressman Tom Cole, a Republican from Moore, whose district includes Tinker Air Force Base in Fort Sill, said it was running 800 to 1 against. So they are probably 6 of them of the 7 are definite no votes, I would say, at this point. Senator Tom Coburn is, he's still trying to take input. He said he's listening. He's concerned about the message it sends if the U.S. does not respond to this. He's wondering, what does Iran do? What does North Korea do? I mean, what are we saying if we don't respond to this strongly? But so he's just very cautious. He's not really saying one way or the other. And of course, at this point, they may not have to vote. But I think even Senator Coburn at this point thinks it's all a big muddled mess. And one of his comments was, it's just amateur hour up there at the White House, the way the entire thing has been handled for the past 3 weeks. And Congressman Langford of Oklahoma City said, it looks like Russia got President Obama out of the corner he painted himself into.
It does kind of have that appearance. Chris, sorry for interrupting you earlier today during this interview. Hey, thanks so much for your time today. Much appreciated.
You bet, Dave. Glad to do it.
Chris Castillo, as always, providing great analysis from our bureau in Washington, D.C. More Washington, D.C. coverage can be found in the Oklahoman and on our website at